We are the main financial mechanism of the global environmental conventions, the most recent one being the Minamata Convention. And they needed a financial mechanism, and because of our experience, they asked us to be active in that space. Our donors decided to embrace this mandate, and now we have that problem to try to solve. And why artisanal and small-scale gold mining is important is because it's the most important source of pollution by mercury worldwide. Close to 40%, no one knows exactly the fraction, between 35 and 40% of all emissions of mercury come from this sector. And it comes from artisanal small-scale gold mining. So if we are going to be addressing this problem, we need to be head-on, concentrated on eliminating mercury from this kind of use. And I think we are at the cusp of transformation with this problem, because the private sector is finally engaged. The supply chain is much more integrated. The information base is becoming much more readily available. The ability to construct multi-stakeholder platforms which are very diverse, such as the one that we have here today. So it's not just the UN agencies or the NGOs talking about this with funders like the GEF, but it's the private sector looking at itself and saying we have to do better. And we have to do better because it's good for our bottom line, and we have to do better because it's the right thing to do. And there is demand for that, and we're going to be walking that path. But it's much more easily said than done, and that's why we need creative solutions. That's why we need to be all in the same room. The philanthropic foundations, public funders like ourselves, and those who can act in the marketplace, which are the supply chain operators. And we bring, of course, financing, but it's not a lot of financing. Public funds are scarce, and they need to be used in a way that can mobilize additional resources. Just to give you an example, out of the $45 million that we're providing for this first phase, and it's just the first phase, we hope to put more money well into the future. It's attracting $136 million from other players, so immediately you see the leveraging that the GEF can bring to the table. Finance is important, but it's hardly the most important piece. The most important piece is really convening all these actors. And the GEF does have a convening power because it's a multilateral organization in which the board is composed of developing countries and developed countries, so donors and recipient countries. So there is that mandate that comes from governments, which, by the way, from today that we heard, are very important players because they need to have the regulations in place, they need to put the framework and the enabling conditions for the private sector to act, because without these conditions it's very hard to create markets that are trusted, that can flourish, and therefore we need all of them together. Well, success is when these people, estimated to be between 10 and 20 million people all over the place, which depend essentially on this activity for their survival. And we're not talking about wealthy individuals, we're talking about individuals that subsist for the most part on a very, very small amount of money. They need to have communities that can be legalized, formalized, that the activity that they have dedicated their lives to take their sustenance from is part of the regular economy, is part of the formal economy. So it's not only about the environment piece, which is our entry point. We are an environmental organization. That's where our mandate comes from. But we can't solve this without solving the social problems, the economic conditions, the discrepancy in terms of benefits that come on the gender basis, the involvement of child labor. So there is a plethora of different problems that we need collectively to solve. That's why we need not only environmental organizations around the table, but we need also the social NGOs, the social organizations that are in the UN system, outside of the UN system, working together to solve it. So it's about sustainable development. It's about, at the end of the day, to push the SDGs on its entirety, from a social, economic, and environmental perspective, all working together. So success will be eliminating, of course, mercury from this process, but it's much more than that. It's about the livelihoods of these people and how they can continue to prosper without destroying the very base of resources that they use inside, natural forests, water, their own health, their prospects for education of their kids. So by bringing formalization into the sector, they can have this, and they can have techniques and opportunity to take away the, let's say, the externalities that are currently plaguing their livelihoods. The GEF is a great convener of organizations, institutions, and it'll be disingenuous to say that the convening power doesn't come also from having public resources to jumpstart these processes, to put some gasoline in this little fire that we all want to transform into something that it's going to transform how this activity occurs throughout the tropics and throughout developing countries. But we do have that mandate, and people recognize that mandate because, after all, we live within governmental systems, we live within the rule of law, and we were given this mandate by these entities. So a multilateral entity has that original, let's say, standing, and people look at us in a different way that they would look, for example, at an NGO, even though it might be the most credible NGO in the world, but they don't come with that mandate. They don't come with that, I wouldn't say credibility, because credibility is a consequence of how honest and how transparent and how integral your operation is. But it's about the ability to bring others to the table. I think that this is the most important comparative advantage of the GEF. Is not the money. Money is important. It's about the convening power. Certain problems find their own moment to be solved. And it's not that anyone can do anything necessarily about it in isolation, but we know when the conjunction of all actors and forces are in the right place with the right resources to just make that little transition, just go over that hump, and then change to a new pathway. We heard this today, and someone was on the table from industry, actually from a representative from one of the luxury brands that are here of global reach, and she said, look, this is the moment that I feel we are on a transformative moment, that we are at the tipping point that we might collectively, we've talked about this amongst ourselves, but now it seems that the conditions are ripe for something that's very different from what happened in the past. So we can accelerate, we can gain scale, and we can solve this problem. It was the first time that we can foresee a future in which we can solve, if not all of these problems at once. We can have a pathway forward for continuous improvement, and hopefully for the solution to this very, very difficult and very, very important problem for ourselves and for the health of our food chain, the health of our bodies, the health of the planet.